Good day, everyone. Our focus today would be on qualitative research. So this is for week two. Okay. So first, I'm going to read to you the objectives that will guide you throughout the entire week. So for our lesson one, you have to provide examples of research in areas of interest, describe the characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and kinds of qualitative research, and illustrate the importance of qualitative research across fields. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, of the Holy Spirit, Amen. God Almighty, your wisdom includes an understanding of what is fair, what is logical, what is true, what is right, and what is lasting. I entrust you to grant me such wisdom that my labors may reflect your insight. Your wisdom expands in your creations, displaying complexity and multiplicity. Your wisdom is an eternity ahead of man. May your wisdom flourish forever. Amen. Okay, so our focus for week two is on qualitative research. And because your research is on qualitative research, you must have to identify the different areas or the different characteristics or attributes of how a qualitative research should be done. Okay, so anyway, to start with, I'm just going to inform you that your research would end for chapter 2. However, we are still going to discuss these ones because these are very essential as you go on with your research subjects. Okay, so first, the first thing that we are going to identify or define is the difference between area of interest versus field research. So how do they differ? A research field is broader than an area of interest. It's like when you are in language, there is what we call the general and the specific. Okay, so I have here examples for you. So we have three columns: the research field, the area of interest, and an example of a research title representing these concepts. Okay, so the first one, if we are going to focus on finance as our research field, then the possible areas of interest can be capital structure, an investment, or a stock market, since these belongs to the field of finance. Now, an example of a research title here shows, or as we may read, the stock market and investment is the market a sideshow. Okay, so that is an example of a research title. Now, let us proceed to the second field of research, environment in the workplace. So there are many concepts or there are many specifics to be discussed in this kind of research field. So this may include safety procedures, sanitation, or quality assurance. So I'm going to give you an example of a research title reflecting these areas of interest. So let us focus on sanitation. The sanitation guidelines implemented in the Aritao public market, is it for compliance? Okay, so that is an example of a research title. Next, another kind of a research field is what we call culture. Okay, so this is a particular example of a research field. Now, culture has different characteristics. Culture has many aspects, right? So we have language, tribal practices, or it may refer to our way of life. Okay, so we have here an example of a research title with regards to culture, and we focus on language. So our research title here is on language barriers. When we say language barriers, barriers that would affect the learning of a new language, or the barriers that affect the understanding of people, of between people, the understanding between or among people using different languages. Okay, so the difficulty in understanding one another because of language differences. Okay, so those are what we call language barriers. Now, language barriers, its effects to the Igorots in adapting to new languages. So isn't it that the Igorots have different kind of accent? So they have different kind of accent. Therefore, when they speak Ilocano, ayan, so nadadala pa rin nila yung accent nila ng Igorot kapag nagsalita sila ng Ilocano. Okay, so what could be the possible effects of these language barriers to the Igorots in adapting to new languages? Could they adapt to new languages easily or difficult or with difficulty? Okay, so that those are examples of research titles. Now, in your activity on page 8, the research field is already being given, has already been given, and you are going to focus on just one area of interest and example of research title. Okay, so after you do your activity, let us discuss different characteristics of qualitative research. So what is qualitative research? Okay, so what are its characteristics? First, the researcher has an important role in qualitative research. So you as the researcher has a very important role in qualitative research because qualitative research is a very engaging kind of research, less compared or much or compared to quantitative research. So let us find it out. Why do you have an important role in qualitative research? First, you must go directly to the place where the study is being conducted. Okay, so what are you going to do there? You have to spend time in the actual location, interviewing, observing, and taking down notes about the participants. You have to record the responses of the participants. The data collected are primarily from the scene and are verified from interviews. You have to treat the participants with respect during the entire procedure. Okay, so compared to quantitative research class, qualitative research is a subjective kind of research. When we say subjective, the results may be influenced by the researcher's personal opinions, personal um, interpretations about the result, okay? The result of his observation, his interview. But that does not mean that um, the result is solely influenced by the researcher, okay? The researchers, that's why the researcher is interviewing and observing. It is because he should gather data in order for him to make or to prove his interpretations, okay? So, as what I'm saying a while back, data collected are primarily from the scene and are verified from the interviews. Okay. So, of course, when you collect data, this should be verified from your interviews. Okay. When I say verified, the interviews should serve as your evidences in order for you to conclude the data that you have collected. And the most important part here, class, is that you have to treat your participants with respect during the entire procedure. How should you do this one? Okay, the first one is that you have to ensure that the participants or that the identity of the participants are considered. Okay, when we say considered, you have to make them anonymous. Okay, you have to respect their privacy when they don't want to expose themselves or when they do not want to make themselves known. Then you should respect that. You shouldn't state their names directly. Okay, next. Next characteristic of a qualitative research is qualitative data are gathered and presented in a form of words, descriptions, pictures, or meanings, and not in numbers. Okay, compared to quantitative research class, in a quantitative research, the results are being tallied, they are being computed through numbers and measuring tools or assessment tools are being used, okay, formulas in order to arrive in a certain conclusion. However, in qualitative data class, we are using words or texts. This can be in a form of interpretation or the researcher's own meaning of the result of the study. Descriptions. Okay. So qualitative data can be gathered and interpreted through the descriptions that are given by the participant. Pictures. Pictures may serve as your evidences and meanings. Okay. So this is the meaning that is derived derived from the study. So first you have to be a keen observer. What do you observe in the environment? What do you observe about the participants? Okay. Take note of every detail, even the gestures and facial expressions of the participants, especially during interviews. Okay. You can collect data through notes, photos, anecdotes, comments, or anything that can help you better understand the participants. So this should serve as your evidences as you go and immerse yourself in interviewing or in gathering data from your participants. The next characteristic of qualitative research is that it is concerned with the process involved. So in qualitative data class, we do not just focus on the output or the result of the study. We have to take in mind, or we have to bear in mind, the different processes involved as we conducted our study. First, you are concerned with the interaction of your participants with each other and to the situations they are in. Okay, so in this one, you have to search for their backgrounds. You have to look into their background information because this may convey meanings and symbols which can be interpreted into words or ideas. Next, it is your duty as a qualitative researcher to take note of this clearly as so as to get substantial information. So what do we mean by substantial information? These observations that you have done or these interviews that you have done, these observations or these the different data gathering procedures that you have done would be essential evidences for you to be able to gather substantial information or enough information about the study or about the participants, about the environment that they are in. Okay, so number 4, inductive reasoning is used in analyzing qualitative data. All right, so we first define what inductive reasoning is and its effects or its influence to how qualitative data or qualitative research is being done. Okay, so when we say inductive reasoning, you focus first on the specific and up to the general information. When we say from the specific, of course, you have to begin with interviews, you have to begin with specific information, gathering information and data before you could be able to conclude to the general conclusion. Okay, that's why you are not expected to formulate a hypothesis at the start of your study because hypotheses are defined and formulated as the study progresses. So for my previous students, I know that you already know this one because the difference between qualitative and quantitative research is that in quantitative research, the hypothesis is already given at the start of your study. So this could be a null hypothesis or an alternative hypothesis. Okay, so I hope you could remember this hypothesis. The hypothesis that you have done are, or a hypothesis, the meaning of hypothesis is a guess, okay, an educated guess, which may have a primary conclusion or a pre-study conclusion about something or about your study. Okay, so in qualitative research, you are not required to make a hypothesis because these hypotheses are defined and formulated as your study progresses. Okay? How could you be able to make a hypothesis without interviewing your respondent first? Sige nga, kung kaya niyong gawin yun. Isn't it that when you interview a person, when you ask something about a person, your conclusion about something that that person have given you or that information, the information the person have given you is your basis to formulate your conclusion about something. Okay. For example, if you ask your friend to tell you about her problem, you have no idea about her problem at all. Okay. But as she starts saying or she starts stating about her problems, then that's the time you would be able to create conclusions or create possible solutions to her problems. Okay. In short, huwag maging judgmental muna. Okay? So that is what we call inductive reasoning. Don't ever go into conclusion without certain pieces or little pieces of evidences. The next one, you are constructing concepts and meanings based on your interpretation at the end of your study. Okay, so the next one, qualitative researcher is concerned with the meanings and interpretation. So that this is what I was telling you a while back. As a qualitative researcher, you are aiming to determine the perceptions and thoughts of the participants and giving reasons to these meanings through interviews and observations. Okay, so when we say you are, as I have said a while back, qualitative research is a subjective kind of research. But that does not mean that if it is subjective, then the meaning would solely rely to the opinion of the researcher. Of course, the researcher would have to gather data first through interviews and observations so that he could be able to proceed to conclusions with his own perceptions and thoughts about the subjects. Okay, what are the strengths? What are the strengths of qualitative research? First, issues can be determined in detail and in depth. Okay, unlike in quantitative research, that the respondents would only answer a checklist or a certain question. In qualitative research, issues can be determined in detail and in depth because you are conducting an interview wherein you are going to talk to the person personally. Okay? So kapag nakikipag-usap ka sa tao, nagiging malalim at nagiging mas detailed yung pag-uusapan ninyo. Okay? So this is one of the strengths of qualitative research. The next one, interviews are not restricted to specific questions and can be guided by the researcher. Okay, so this does not mean that you should you should focus on specific questions that are stated. So as you go on with the interview or as you go on with the interview, you can add questions related to your subject. Okay. For example, kapag hindi ka na kontento sa sagot niya sa isang question, then pwede kang mag-attendum, pwede kang mag-ask, or pwede kang magtanong ng ibang questions related to your study or related to what you really are trying to point out or trying to find out. The next one, the research framework and direction can be quickly revised as the new information emerges. So in qualitative research, we cannot deny or we cannot um, control the fact that new information emerges as we go on with our interview. So sometimes what we are expecting is in contrast to the new information that emerges. Kung ano ina-expect mo, iba palang information yung magagather mo. Okay. For example, if you are expecting a positive response from the respondent, then bigla siyang nagsabi ng hindi po ganito yan. Okay? So, in that alone, you can change your research framework and direction. Also, iibahin ko pala yung approach ko kasi iba pala yung information. May bago palang information. Okay, next. The database on human experience that is obtained is powerful and sometimes more compelling than quantitative data, of course. Subtleties and complexities about research subjects are discovered that are often missed by more pessimistic inquiries. Okay, so a particular example here, class, is when you ask a person. So if you are expecting a positive response from a person and then suddenly he stated a negative response, okay, hindi mo maiiwasan yon, right? So if you are expecting a positive response, for example, how do you feel about this? And then you're expecting that he feels good about it, okay? And then and then in contrast, he said that he doesn't feel good about it, okay? So that is an example of subtleties and complexities being experienced in research. Hindi mo ma-expect, no? Next, data usually are collected from a few cases or individuals, so findings cannot be generalized to a larger populations. A larger population. So in here, in qualitative research, you are on hand. Okay? On hand kayo sa mga tao o sa mga participants na i-interview ninyo. Okay? So findings cannot be generalized to a larger population. Okay? So the responses that you get from a certain respondent would be the result of your study, okay, the result of the interview and the like. Okay, if there are strengths of qualitative research, there are also weaknesses and limitations. First, it relies heavily on the individual skill of the researcher and more easily influenced by the researcher's personal biases and idiosyncrasies. Okay, so as I have said a while back, qualitative research is subjective, right? And it is influenced by the researcher's personal biases and idiosyncrasies. So we could never be certain whether the researcher is stating the exact conclusion on a certain subject. Malay mo, magkamali-mali siya, di ba? Next, rigor is more difficult to maintain, assess, and demonstrate. The volume of data makes analysis and interpretation time consuming. So volume of data may refer to the volume of interview, kung gaano kadami yung interview na nag-gather mo, kung gaano kadami yung data, kung gaano kabigat o gaano kadami yung observation na napansin mo. Okay? So if you are going to collaborate those, if you are going to um, get all of those, then it would make your analysis and interpretation more time consuming. Okay. Next, it is sometimes not as well understood and accepted as quantitative within the scientific community. Of course, it is not merely or it is not well accepted in the scientific community. Kasi nga, it relies on the personal biases of the researcher, which sometimes do not follow the scientific approach. The next one, the researcher's presence during data gathering, which is often unavoidable in qualitative research, can affect the subject's responses. Take for example, kapag nag-exam ka, okay? Kapag nag-exam ka, if you're taking your exam and your teacher just goes around, okay, parang binabantayan ka lagi ng teacher mo, isn't it na may intimidate ka? Tama? Okay, isn't it na may intimidate ka? And your responses or your answers to the exam would turn out or would not turn out great. Hindi ka makakapag-isip ng maayos, hindi ka makakapag-focus ng maayos. Okay? So same with conducting research. Okay? Your presence would intimidate or would affect the subject's responses. Okay? So kahit gusto niyang sabihin yung totoo, pwedeng magsinungaling siya kasi nandun ka. Okay? Pwedeng hindi niya sabihin yung exact na nangyayari sa kanyang kapaligiran kasi nandun ka. Kasi nahihiya siyang baka sabihin mong ganito, ganyan. Okay. So that would no. That's why respect is very important. That's why you should have a presentable presence, or that's why you should have what do we call this one? A friendly presence in the environment that you are where you conduct your research. Uses of anonymity and confidentiality can present problems when presenting findings. Findings can be more difficult and time-consuming to characterize in a visual way. Okay, kaya nga madami yung information na nakuha mo. Okay, you have a lot of information that are gathered. That's why you find it difficult to characterize it in a visual way. Okay, so we proceed to the different qualitative research approaches. The aim of qualitative research is to obtain deeper understanding of certain phenomena, cultures, cases, or any human-related experiences by providing answers to why or how these phenomena occur. Okay, so what is the aim of qualitative research? It is to answer the whys and hows of a certain phenomena. How do these phenomena occur? Why do these occur? Okay. How do you relate to this phenomena? Okay. How do you respond to these phenomena that occur in your environment? It may also be conducted to determine the socioeconomic impact of situations in the society. For example, the phasing out of jeepneys in Metro Manila. Okay, so this is an example of a phenomena class. Pag sinabi nating phenomena, it refers to a certain situation. Okay, so if it refers to a certain situation, then respondents would be affected or participants would be affected. Now, a certain phenomena here is phasing out of jeepneys in Metro Manila. What would be the effect to the participants, especially the jeepney drivers, when their jeepneys are being phased out? What happens to them? Why do they have to phase out these jeepneys? Okay, and how would the jeepney drivers adapt to this certain situation, or how would they find solution to this certain situation? You need interview for this. You need to gather information about this. It may also directly impact specific groups. Example, implementation of outcomes-based education or OBE. So yung education natin ngayon is OBE-based. Anong ibig sabihin ng OBE-based? Outcomes-based, right? Outcomes-based siya. Which means in every process, there should be an outcome or there should be an output. Now, how does this affect the adaptability of students with regard to their interests and abilities? Is OBE effective? So, yung participants mo dito is students. Okay? Effective ba sa kanila ang OBE? Another example, it may be used to obtain detailed information pertinent to marginalized sectors. It aims to identify specific needs and concerns of marginalized people or children and designs programs to find solution to these needs. Okay, one example of qualitative research approach is applied when you are researching on the marginalized people. So when we say marginalized people, this may refer to people with um, poor access, okay? Poor access to medical health, poor access to economic stability or poor economic stability and others, okay? So you need to find out the reasons why they are marginalized and you have to design programs to find solution to these needs. Okay. Ayan, sa yung gamit ng research approach. Now, what are the different approaches? The first one is what we call the ethnography. It is derived from anthropology. In this approach, the ethnographer studies cultural groups. He observes the participants by immersing himself to the kind of society the participants belong. So this is in a form of an immersion wherein you have to involve yourself in the group. Okay. Parameters may include tribal, religious, geographical, and shared experiences. So you may focus on just one. For example, if you want to focus on the tribal practices of these people, you are going to focus on the religious practices of these people. The geographical location, paano nakakaapekto ang geographical location sa kanila? Okay. Malayo ba sila sa medical health? Malayo ba sila sa access sa food? Yun kaya, malayo kayo sila sa access sa trabaho. Ayun. And shared experiences. You could also obtain information from their shared experiences. This approach requires extensive fieldwork not only for data gathering purposes, but also validating the data and checking the reliability of the interpretation. The researcher is immersed in the day-to-day activities of the participants, and eventually concepts such as kinship, social structure, political structure, and other may be deduced from these interpretations. Okay, so what we are talking about here, class, is that in this type of approach, you are going to immerse yourself in their day-to-day activities, in which you have to be a keen observer and you have to observe their day-to-day life. Okay, concepts such as kinship, as you proceed or as you go on with your research, you can observe many different concepts or many different characteristics which you may observe like kinship, social structure, political structure. Paano kaya nakakaapekto tong mga to doon sa pamumuhay nila? Okay? Ayun. Social kinship, pagkakaibigan, social structure, kung may mayaman ba sa kanila, may mahirap ba, political structure, how is their political structure, may leader ba sila o wala? What kind of government do they have or what kind of little government do they have? And how would this affect their life in the environment? Okay, so that is what we call ethnography. Next, we proceed to phenomenology. Okay, phenomenology. Okay, the root word is phenomena. This refers to the study of phenomena involving human events, situations, concepts, experiences, or needs. Explores the meaning of a participant's feelings, thoughts, insights, and perceptions regarding a particular phenomenon, investigates the personal experiences of individuals, and attempts to find a common ground between personal experiences and the participants' responses. Questions such as what experiences have you experienced relevant to this particular phenomenon? What factors were influenced by these phenomena? Other examples, consider assessing the unique attributes of gifted and average children. Okay, so first, we proceed with the experiences, okay, or the phenomenon itself. Okay, first you have to investigate. Okay, you have to investigate the personal experiences of these individuals, and it says here that you have to find a common ground, right? What experiences have you experienced relevant to this particular phenomenon? What factors were influenced by these phenomena? For example, if you are going to research on the effect of the COVID-19 um, to the psychological state of people. Okay, so you're going to search for a particular group. Now, pag tinanong mo sila, how do you feel about or how do you feel about COVID-19? What were your experiences during the lockdown? Okay, or mula nung lockdown? Okay. What factors were influenced by these phenomenons? Bakit ka natatakot? Okay. Pag sinagot niyo yung tanong mo, for example, what experiences have you experienced? Okay. Naghirap kami, nawalan kami ng trabaho, sabi niya. Okay. What factors were influenced? Dahil sa COVID, nagsara yung mga kumpanya namin. Right? So those were the factors being influenced by COVID-19. But COVID-19 is our example of the phenomenon here. Okay. Ayan. So another example, assessing the unique attributes of gifted and average children. Do gifted children seem to be more antisocial than the average ones? Okay, kung ma-observe mo, di ba? Gifted children seem to be antisocial. So if you really want to prove that one, then you have to do some research. On athletes naman, are the social lives of athletes affected due to consecutive intensive trainings? Ayan. Or not? Or they could still manage to do it? Both. Okay, let us proceed to narrative research. This narrates the life of an individual as told to the researcher or gathered by the researcher from available documents of materials. It highlights special events in an individual's life. In this approach, subjects or participants tell their own stories about a certain phenomena or event. The researcher then organizes their story, retells it in a logical framework wherein the plot is considered. Eventually, the problem is identified, and the researcher and the participant collaborate to identify turning points in the story. And this would then be the output of the researcher. So what do we do in a narrative research? In a narrative research, we are going to interview a life of a participant or a certain aspect or a certain event in an individual's life, which also has in relation to our study. Okay, for example, COVID-19. Ayan, COVID-19 na naman tayo. Okay, kindly relay your experiences magmula nung lockdown hanggang ngayon. Okay, and then the participant will talk. The participant will tell his own story. And then you as a researcher, you have to organize his story due or within a logical framework. Pag sinabi nating logical framework, you are going to arrange his story from the exposition to the ending. Okay? Wherein the plot is considered. Sino ba yung kalaban doon? Sino ba yung bida doon? Okay? And then of course, you have to identify the problem. Okay? You have to identify the problem in his narration. And then you would, after identifying the problem, you and the participant would collaborate to identify the turning points in the story and would eventually give solutions to the story. Okay. And afterwards, this would then be your output. Yan, pag sinabi nating narrative. Okay, for grounded theory, okay, this research approach is employed if there is no available theory to explain a particular phenomenon or process. The researcher interviews participants about the presence and occurrence of a particular phenomenon. Questions may appear like this. What is the core of that phenomenon? What happened to the phenomenon after applying such strategy? Okay. An example of phenomenon here is nawalan ka ng trabaho. Okay. Lack of, what do we call this one? You lost your job. That is an example of a phenomenon. Now, since you cannot use other theories or there are no theories that may serve as your basis in researching, then you would solely rely on the experiences of your participant. Or um, you would rely on the experiences of your participants by means of interview. So, ganito ka mag-interview. Paano nagsimula yung problema mo? Bakit ka nawalan ng trabaho? What is the core or what is the reason of that problem or that phenomenon? Okay. And then sabi niya, nawalan ako ng trabaho dahil nag-close yung kumpanya namin o nag-close yung pinagtatrabahuan ko. All right. And then afterwards, you look for the strategies that he has applied. So, of okay, nawalan ka ng trabaho. And then what did you do afterwards? What were your strategies to still sustain the needs of your family? Then sabi niya, for example, sabi niya, okay, I did online selling. Of course, I did online selling. Yan, yun yung sagot niya. And then, what happened to the phenomenon after applying such strategy? Anong nangyari nung after ka nag-live o nag-online selling? Then, sabi niya, of course, when I did online selling, it went well. Everything went well. And I was able to provide for my family. So those are examples, class. Okay? So in a grounded theory or in grounded theory approach, you are going to interview as much persons as possible. Malay mo kasi sa iba, hindi ganun yung maging experience nila. Malay mo sa iba, umaasa na lang sila sa government. And unlike him, unlike the other participant that you have interviewed, na talagang gumawa siya ng way. Okay? So that's why you have to interview at least 20 to 30 participants to gather sufficient details about the process. Okay, so dito mo makikita kung how did your respondents respond or adapt to the current phenomenon that they have experienced. So after interviewing them all, magko-conclude ka na kung ilan ang gumawa nito, ilan ang nagdiskarte, ilan ang hindi dumiskarte. Then eventually, you would give your own analysis as a researcher. Okay? So another one is the case study. So when we say case study, you are going to focus on a specific case. okay, to narrow the scope or area of what you are trying to find out. So in a case study, you are going to focus on just one scope or area. Kailangan mong aralin lang isang area. For example, a sample topic here is the GB syndrome, in which it says here that the GB syndrome is a neurological disease which causes characteristics muscle weakness and or paralysis. Okay. So kung gusto mong aralin ito, pumunta ka sa isang hospital. Okay? Pumunta ka sa isang hospital, you are going to study patients, of course, with consent on their public medical records to be able to establish the chronology of events before early symptoms and partial paralysis appears to determine the efficacy of the treatment. Istadihin mo siya kung paano nagsimula yung symptoms ng kanyang sakit. And then afterwards, you are going to determine the efficacy of the treatment. Efficient ba yung treatment noong lumala na? O mas efficient yung treatment noong nagsisimula pa lang yung sakit? Parang ganon, okay? So, how does the efficacy of treatment differ when the patient has still been experiencing the early symptoms? What is the difference when the sickness became severe? Okay? Anong pagkakaiba ng efficacy or efficacy ng treatment noong nagsisimula pa yung sakit at nung malala na yung sakit? Okay? May difference ba? Ayun. And then, of course, you have to generate a descriptive analysis of each case within its case analysis and then compare that analysis to other analyses conducted. From there, you can make an interpretation and judgments based on those analyses, which may be likened to learning lessons from these patients with this sickness. So, for example, in your conclusion, nalaman mo na mas mag-take effect yung gamot kapag or mas maagapan agad yung sakit kapag nagsisimula pa lang rather than lumala na ito, then you would learn a lesson that before pa lang na lumala yung sakit, kailangan mo nang magpagamot. Okay? So that is a certain kind of case study. Case study. Ayan. So for your activity here, in page 11, what have I learned so far? Given the following list of research problems, what would be the most suitable qualitative research to employ for each? And then, of course, after giving the qualitative research approach, you have to defend your answer at least 1 to 2 sentences. Okay, so that is for this week. Thank you for listening.